All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well today. And today we're going to talk about our new mission, which is the Integral Campus Project. And so to begin, I thought we could talk a little bit about what Integral Campus is, what the mission is, and a little bit about ourselves in this process. So, Devon or Emanuel, do you want to start off with one of these?
Thanks for the introduction there, Ryan. This is Devon, and Integral Campus is we're really grounded on and committed in leading edge learning for citizens in an evolving world. So this isn't like K-12 type or even higher education type learning. Rather, it is what I would call it. It's a deeper higher education. It is an integral, all-encompassing form of learning. And the citizenship element is that it's for community residents, it's for college students, it's for professionals, it is for people from all walks of life. And there's also another element there, that this leading edge learning for citizens all happens in the context of an evolving world, that the world is continuously evolving, as are we. And I think that's really what is important and central in the aspiration of this mission, and also the implementation of this mission. And this implementation is really occurring, will hopefully occur across the nation and perhaps internationally, and all the while very much being grounded in a way that is extremely accessible and incredibly relevant, and isn't inhabited by or isn't inhibited by financial barriers. So we aim to deliver a very high level of program that is also very deep, it's very robust, it's very accessible, and do that collaboratively, and so that all of us, facilitators and participants alike, will draw out their greatest gifts in service of.
Yeah, thank you, Devon. That was wonderful. Does anyone else hear that noise?
There's a train going by my house right now. Maybe that's the noise.
Gotcha. Okay, it really sounded like an alien spaceship was like landing outside of your yard because of the echo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I
but
hope it goes away soon.
yeah, it'll be fine. Yeah, Devon, thank you. That was a beautiful summary, and I think you really nailed all of the salient points of Integral Campus, including the financial affordability and accessibility. So thank you for that beautiful summary. Emmanuel, do you want to weigh in on this a little bit?
Well, the only thing that I was going to say is that I think content-wise, we're aiming to focus on the kind of foundations of integral theory, and then kind of its applications to different fields as we work with people and as we continue to develop. But generally, kind of the area of leadership, sustainability, and education are kind of like where our backgrounds are, and so kind of bringing these together and creating programs around these fields, coming from an integral perspective, I think it's one of the areas that we want to focus on.
Yeah, definitely. And just to add something here, I think a lot of people have had this idea that integral consciousness or integral theory in general is what's going to really change the world and move the world towards a better place. But what I've come to notice for myself is that what will really make an impact is applied integral theory. It's not, you can go home at night and read A Brief History of Everything and other integral books, but you may not be able to apply it in your life. That gap may not be closed. And so I think what Integral Campus is trying to do is help people very specifically close that gap and make the integral framework most easily applicable to whatever field you're in, whether it's business, leadership, sustainability, community development, personal development, and coaching, so that we can really get this model out into the world. So in regards to the mission and what we see for Integral Campus, anything else either of you would like to add?
I think that's a really important point, Ryan, that you draw out of this, of what you're communicating. And I'm almost visioning Integral as sort of our orientation or our anchor. And I'm reminded of Maslow when he was doing his work with the hierarchy of needs. You know, in the being needs, he talked about these deficiency based, or in the deficiency needs, he spoke of how there was a drive associated with it. And when we get into these being needs, these sufficiency based needs, there's more of an orientation. And I think it's that orientation that we individually and us collectively and all participants who are you know contributing and a part of Integral Campus will really be anchored in and are really anchored in this kind of orienting life direction that comes from this integral compass. And I think that's, you know, just another kind of elaboration and refinement of the mission of Integral Campus.
Yeah, wonderful. Great. So I thought next we could get into some personal accounts of how we discovered Integral, how Integral plays a part in our lives, so people can get a little better sense of who we are and our backgrounds and what we bring to the table. So to start, the next question is, this is a personal story. How did we discover Integral initially? Anyone want to kick it off?
Sure, I'll start. I originally came across developmental psychology at my college and at Mauritius University here, and when I was doing my master's program, and I was really fascinated by this idea of, you know, the kind of stages of development that humans go through as they progress and grow. And when I started doing more research, that's when I came across, you know, Ken Wilber's work and integral theory, and kind of the quadrant approach. But for me, it's always been kind of like the developmental stages is kind of my primary lens, I guess. And then the other lenses within Integral have kind of started coming into place a little more over time. And so yeah, and now I'm kind of trying to work on my dissertation and my PhD program and include integral developmental framework as kind of the underlying framework for my dissertation work. So that's kind of, in a very short shell, how I've come about integral theory and how I'm applying it right now.
Wow, wonderful. Yeah, very. I didn't know that you had discovered it relatively recently. I mean, in the context of your academic work.
Yeah. I mean, I started my MBA like 7 years ago, and so that's kind of the time frame that I've been working with it the last 7 or 8 years. Yeah.
Yeah, great, awesome, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll add too, and I think an interesting point here as well is that, I mean, Emanuel is giving his introduction, and Emanuel, you're from Austria.
Yes, not Australia.
I'm not Australia. I'm from Canada. Ryan from Hawaii, and we all meet here in the mainland U.S. And it's this context in Canada, and more specifically in northern and subarctic Canada, where I stumbled into Integral. And at the time, I was like Emanuel. I was a student. I was working on my doctoral degree, and I was studying higher education in northern and rural communities. And at the time, I was attempting to build university learning communities in an area called the Athabasca oil sands. And so these are incredibly rich natural resource-based region where there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of oil camp workers. And oil camp workers in this context overwhelmingly are not interested in the type of programming that I, as a facilitator to build these university learning communities, had to offer. And this was a stark contrast. And before that, I'd worked a fair bit with rural community colleges. And, you know, I started to articulate that southern urban universities and rural community colleges had very different mindsets and very different orientations. I'd also spent several years working and ultimately living in Indigenous community contexts. And again, there was stark differentiations. And all of a sudden, these three different worldviews or lenses of making meaning and identifying and perceiving and capacities for perspective taking began to make sense. And I recall it was in I think it was 2012, although it might have been 2011. It was on my birthday in October, and I was traveling on the Wabasca First Nation, so a reserve in northern Alberta, Canada, and I'm listening to this audiobook, and it's Wilbur essentially paraphrasing Don Beck's work on spiral dynamics with Chris Cowan as well, and it just absolutely crystallized. And you know, this element that all of these worldviews have a place really hit home. And you know, I was kind of coming from this, I guess we might say, a green sort of pluralistic orientation that, you know, I'd go back to the university and say, you've got it all wrong. In rural communities, people think like this. And in native communities, people view the world this way. And, you know, you need to adapt, the university need to adapt to not only meet the needs, but also the values and the aspirations of these different areas. And all of a sudden it all fit together. And that was just, you know, one of the most profound and impactful and poignant moments of my life.
Wow, beautifully said, Devon. Thank you. It's interesting to hear you, because it sounds like simply being exposed to the plurality of different worldviews kind of ripened your consciousness to be ready for an integral worldview. It's almost like having exposure to all of these different views kind of prepared you to be able to take that leap to a more second tier kind of outlook.
I think you're right on that, Ryan, that whenever we're, you know, we might be swimming in the ocean, and then we need to step out and reflect back on ourselves, like get back on the beach and reflect back on ourselves swimming in the ocean, so that we can, as Robert Keegan has often said, make object what was earlier subject. And then of course there's, you know, also making subject what was earlier object that comes from that. And being able to have a framework and a container to hold these multiple perspectives certainly did offer a way to step on the beach and to observe and participate and interact and build systems in different areas more effectively.
Yeah, it's such an incredibly practical system and way of looking at things. And I'll just briefly mention how I found integral theory, because it's very different from both of your stories of work in graduate school and so forth. But I was 15 years old. I was a high school dropout, but my mom was very much into listening to tapes and lectures from Sounds True magazine. And she had ordered The Brief History of Everything audiobook because it looked interesting. And you know, there's that picture of Ken Wilber where he looks kind of like Superman. And we were like, oh, look at this guy, he looks really smart, you know, maybe he has something interesting to say. And so in the car, when we would drive around in the van, she would play some of the audiobooks, and he was talking about hold-ons in was it brief? Yeah, it was Brief History of Everything. And we had no idea what the heck he was talking about. And we just put the CD-ROMs on the bookshelf, and they just collected dust for the next 2 years. But somewhere along the way, I came back to them and saw how somehow this resonated with me a lot. And I was initially very drawn in by the spiritual part of it and by the real perspicacious psychological insights that Ken had expounded, especially in his earlier books like No Boundary and Working with the Shadow. That was a huge insight for me. And then I stopped being interested in integral, though, after about 2 years when I was like 18 or 19. And I just put it aside. But then in 2015, I kind of had a resurgence of interest when one of my friends got really into reinventing organizations and applying integral framework in the workplace to move organizations towards a Teal organizational structure. And that and after Trump got elected in 2016, that really ignited my inspiration when Ken Wilber wrote the article on, and in the book about Trump in the post-truth world, applying the integral developmental framework to political tensions and polarization, and how that amounted in the election of Donald Trump. And of course, at that time, I, like a lot of people, were doing a lot of soul searching and investigating about, well, how this had happened, this very unusual event. And integral framework, once again, really hit the nail on the head. And I felt, and my interest in integral shifted from previously upper left quadrant, inner spiritual personal development, to more social change and doing work in the world. So that's kind of how I discovered integral, and the shift that I had undergone over the about 8 or 9 years. So next, I thought we could touch a little bit about how integral has had an impact on our lives, and how we have integrated integral into our lives. So, Emanuel, do you want to start this one
off? Yeah, sure. Well, I think what's been most important for me is that it's allowed me to really see different perspectives on a lot of issues and topics. And, with kind of the quadrants and the developmental levels, I think those two are, for me, kind of the two strongest frameworks that I kind of automatically fall back to now whenever I, try to talk to somebody or try to understand the topic. I try to kind of look at it from these different perspectives. And for me, a lot of it came out of kind of the personal development and organizational change kind of literature. So, Torbert and what you mentioned, Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux, were really impactful for me in terms of seeing how, different systems and different structures are formed by our value system, and how they have certain benefits and certain downsides, and really kind of getting a much clearer perspective on, how our current economic system works, how our, and what are kind of steps we can take to make it better, or to change it in a certain direction. And so, my work has been around kind of sustainability and organizational change. And so, seeing also how sustainability can be framed in a lot of different ways, from, kind of protecting the God-given lands, to kind of ecosystem services, to kind of more of a Gaia, very green theory, and being able to, communicate with my students, my co-students, my faculty in these different languages has been really helpful for me to kind of, get better at working with people and moving my projects forward. So that's kind of one angle that integral has helped me. I've also, on the kind of personal practice side, the Integral Life Practice book was really influential for me, and like looking at how I, use meditation, or how meditation and exercise and nutrition kind of fit together, and then the more kind of social and relational aspects of that, and the shadow work side of it. So all of these kind of fit together for me into this kind of like bigger life practice picture, and that's where I see kind of the power of the quadrants and the developmental lines and stages. Yeah.
Well, wonderful. So it has a lot of implications for both your personal and your professional life. And it also seems like it's really helped you to, and how you would present things to different people depending on their worldview, and also structures how you would frame something when you would communicate that to someone else. So
yeah, totally. Yeah.
it's all things that was, I think Ken Wilber would have been very happy to hear what you just said. Making very good use of the integral framework. So thank you. Devon?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ryan and Emanuel. And like Emanuel, and I think you as well, Ryan, this element of a life practice is really central to the way in which I engage the integral approaches. And I really resonate with Emanuel's, to me levels or lenses is an important element, and so too is the quadrant. And how this relates to me, it's really about ourselves, our communities, and life work, so that this personal realm that we often associate with life isn't necessarily distinct from this professional realm of work. And so it's been very interesting for me over the last few years to explore this notion of life work. And as Parker Palmer, who actually comes from Iowa, where Emanuel and I first became acquainted, he poignantly inquires, is the life we're living the life that also wants to live through us? Mm-hmm. And an affirmative answer to that poignant inquiry, that's a calling. That's life work. And that's very different than this career orientation, than this job orientation. And so it's been interesting for me to explore how the upper left quadrant of the self, the lower left quadrant of community, and the right side quadrants, or the big three of life and work, come together. And I realize I'm collapsing a bit here, but that's kind of been the framework for me, as well as the different developmental lenses, largely translated in those terms of lenses, in terms of worldviews. And over the last number of years, I've been very interested in the relationships and the interactions between colleges and towns, and using the integral quadrant and the developmental stages or lenses through that framework of looking at local residents, local organizations, the interactions between college and town concretely, or education and community in subtle terms. And all of that is really held within the umbrella of life practice. I was very fortunate a few years ago to have been part of a startup integral organization in northern Canada as well. And that organization, I think is really kind of like the seeds of at least what I might contribute to Integral Campus here today. And I'm so delighted that we can do this together across the U.S. and perhaps in other places across the world as well. And to me, as I stated earlier, with this orientation, integral is an orientation to living. It's a bold orientation. That is a being and becoming orienting life direction. A being and becoming orienting life direction. And so that's how I live it, integrating that life and practice, that life work with self, with community.
Yeah, beautiful, Devon. Thank you. I know that this theme seems to be very important to you, of integrating your personal life and your personal self with your work life and your work persona, and harmonizing those two formerly very disparate worlds that I think Orange modernity drew a very hard and fast line between those two worlds. And I was doing some reflecting on this, because the last time in history, in the last time period in history was the traditional period. That was when work and your personal life were all kind of rolled into one thing, because you grew up in a small town in a medieval guild society, for example, and everyone knew everything about you when you showed up for work. They knew who your parents were. They knew what your father's role in the community was. And so all of your roles were very clearly delineated, and there wasn't a lot of freedom, but everyone knew you on a personal level. So the whole idea of like modern alienation partly arose due to that hard and fast line, that wedge that was driven between your work and professional life. And I know that that's a topic that you touch on a lot, and I appreciate that motif that you bring to the table. So this discussion segues perfectly into the next subject I thought we could touch on, which is how integral has enhanced specific topics in our lives. And for this one, I want you guys to kind of share a little bit more too about the background, your background and professional work that you've done, and how the integral lens, and I know you've touched a little bit on this in sharing the last segment, but how the integral framework has really enriched and bolstered these subjects these fields that you work in. So, Emanuel, you want to take it off?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a couple of things that I wanted to mention. One of them is that I've been working with a nonprofit here in town a few years ago called the Devon Project, and the Devon Project, pretty much the idea was that we bought an old building on the square and created kind of like an open community space on a very green level, and the three founders kind of used an integral developmental framework to kind of set it up in that way. And that was kind of the first time that I really learned about, the nuts and bolts of like, how do you create a community space that is, open and flexible, and at the same time has like clear kind of boundaries and expectations. And that to me was kind of the starting point of going into, okay, what are integral systems and how can they work and how can you tweak them? And, coming into kind of holacracy and like, second tier management structures really became interesting to me. And then the second part was really around kind of my work here at MUM at the school, and then my dissertation and my teaching, I think, really benefited from this framework. As I already said earlier, really using an integral framework, not even so much as a front end. Like I don't have to talk with students about integral theory to apply integral theory to how I structure a classroom or how I structure my dissertation. And so, the second part really was when Devon and I started working out in Hawaii and taking these students on these 6-week kind of really immersive trip around sustainability and leadership, and really kind of digging into using integral theory as, we introduced the students to kind of the basics of integral theory, but then the more nuts and bolts was really using the model to design our classroom and to design our interactions with the students. And that really, gave us a lot more kind of flexibility on how we work with students and a lot more insight on how to approach certain topics. So yeah, I think that's kind of my two kind of specific examples of how integral has really helped me in certain projects or areas of my life.
Yeah. So it's not only explicitly teaching or sharing about integral theory, but also subtly applying it kind of in the background as an overall way to frame and structure your activities and your work.
Yeah, and I've really come to kind of think about it as kind of two different levels. There's the back end level is kind of what I use in my head, and then the front end is what I share with people. And I can use integral as a back end to design courses or organizations or communities, but I don't have to explicitly talk about it, and people are still gonna get the benefits from those multiple perspectives.
Yeah, brilliant. Kind of like a deep structure and a surface structure that people refer to sometimes. So
yeah,
wonderful. Devon, you want to say anything?
The work of Pacific Integral, and especially Terry O'Fallon and her developmental stages models, and many of her colleagues as well, has been incredibly impactful for me. And I've had the opportunity to study on a couple of occasions with Pacific Integral and other affiliated organizations, and that framework has, more than it has been something that I've applied to as a tool, it's in many ways become, again, sort of this orienting place. So it's speaking from subject rather than using object as a tool. And that is that is an either or in that sort of capacity. And that doesn't mean that the external tool isn't there, but I think that that's been an incredibly impactful shift in the direction of my life, is the work through that organization. And that's impacted me professionally. I traveled across North America visiting college towns that had a population of 20% or more of people who are college students. And in that way, using the concrete, subtle, and causal stages articulated through that early versions of that framework, it was really, really interesting to look at the towns as containers that local people grow into, and what holds common. What do people, asking the question of what do people hold common in towns? I grew up in very, very concrete areas where what is held common is industrial work. It is agriculture. It is rather not life affirming in the sense of supporting education. In contrast, American college towns have a very, very different orientation, whereas what's held common is the subtleties around education. And people grow into that. And there are also significant limitations on what higher education perceives its possibilities to be. It's organizations like Maharishi University, where Emanuel and I have been colleagues for a couple of years, that are testing some of these boundaries and are cracking open possibilities. And in the same place, organizations, all organizations, particularly some of these alternative organizations, also have blind spots. And so it's been interesting, looking at waking up and growing up and showing up and cleaning up in the context of organizations, education organizations, in the context of communities, in the context of our personal lives and our professional lives. So I'm very grateful for the integral framework, or what I may start calling an integral orientation.
Yeah, thank you, Devon. Devon, can you share a little bit more about what your exact work was in these small towns and college towns? Kind of what were you trying to do in these towns?
In the college towns, I've worked in quite a few different higher education institutions, and I've actually traveled to around 400 different college campuses across North America. So there's a whole bunch of different stages. What I'll briefly mention is what I was trying to do in these college towns, which involve 34 states, and I think it was over close to 2 years that I was traveling across visiting these college towns, is I was trying to see what the concrete characteristics of the college were as represented in the town. And so I would go into college towns, and I would drive by campus and look for any representation of the college nearby. Similarly, I would do that downtown, and I would go to third places like coffee shops, peek in the windows of places on Main Street, and just to see how the college is represented in the town, and then to conceptualize and theorize that what people are around, mostly, they tend to grow into. And Terry O'Fallon offers this great example of, you can have a container, and in that container can have the seed of a plant, and it can have all the soil, and it can have water, but it might have a lid on it. And so often these towns are containers that have lids on them. And so I wanted to, figure out a way that we might open that lid to let the sunlight in, so that the what's inside, that our latent potentials might blossom. And I thought that college towns could offer a good model for places that don't have education inherently in their towns. So mainly rural communities in Canada, but it's equally applicable in, rural communities in Kentucky or Nebraska or wherever, because we essentially have the same worldviews present in there, to essentially have a model. So kind of like a kit to embed education into community. And I want to, the original essence of the word communication refers to how we make common. And the original essence of community refers to how we hold common. So if we're making common just on these surface structures, on these external objective right-hand dimensions, that's how we're also going to build our community. And we're going to build a more robust community if we're also making common, communicating in all different forms in our day-to-day environments, and holding common on the interior. And this comes through what we see in a day-to-day environment, what we hear, and what we touch. So the audio, the visual, and the kinesthetic. And so these were all dimensions that I was very interested in exploring. What do local residents touch in a day-to-day environment? How do they touch into the college? How do they hear about the college? And this is often comes through informal associations like alumni or athletics or some associations, and also what we see in a day-to-day environment. So the language of campus, of freshmen, of college Ave, and so forth, all building that container that embeds education into community. Now, the last thing I'll say here is, again, higher education, it builds a container that essentially has a glass ceiling of postmodernism that isn't an integral container. And I think it's organizations like what we're aspiring here with Integral Campus that seeks to, open that lid and evolve us beyond that postmodern glass ceiling. And that happens with citizens, and of course students are also citizens.
Excellent, excellent. And that's a great segue into our next topic, but I just have one more question because I'm so curious. So you've been to so many different colleges and college towns. Did you have a favorite one, or one that really jumped out at you that we should all go and visit?
A personal favorite? There's two. I really appreciate Washington State University and the University of Idaho in Moscow-Pullman. They're both around 20,000 people, and there's the typical kind of college town rivalries that happen between the two towns, and so that was also the first college town I went to. So that's a bit of a personal favorite. And the one I'm going to mention though is or the other one that I'm going to mention is in Arcata, California, and it's home to Arcata, California is home to Humboldt State University. And I had a research grant in Northern Canada. I was on a sabbatical for the university I was working for, and I was traveling around just trying to think about how could education be embedded into an area where there wasn't higher education. And I was in Arcata, California, and I was sitting in a coffee shop, and I looked around, and everywhere it was like college here, freshman, campus, university. There was, what I was seeing and what I was hearing was college. It was embedded into the town. So it was then that I thought, well, the college town can be a model for these small towns in northern Canada that I was working on, or that I was exploring. So the first kind of college town that I went to, the college towns of Moscow, Pullman, and Arcata are certainly kind of favorites that stand out, Ryan.
Cool, interesting. Well, I'll have to put that on my bucket list to go and visit. So next, I thought we could talk about what we think is next for our lives related to Integral, and that also includes what's next for the Integral campus. And Emanuel, if you want to start
All
off.
right. Yeah. Well, on kind of like my personal level, I think, for me, I'm still kind of working on developing this kind of framework of an integral life practice for myself, and kind of bringing this integral orientation into kind of every aspect of my life, which it's been a really fun exploration over the last few years. And then the second part would be, I'm still I'm finishing up. I'm working on my dissertation that's including kind of an integral framework within it. So kind of continue working on that. And I'm also Devon and I started a integral coaching program together through Integral Coaching Canada, which has been really great kind of furthering of my understanding of how to apply integral to kind of personal development and helping people move through challenges in their life. And so I want to finish that and then start, working with clients one-on-one or in small groups on developing kind of this coaching practice. And then the third one is Integral Campus. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that in later. But, definitely developing different focus programs for Integral Campus. Kind of my personal focus areas would be around, sustainability, personal development, and organizational change, and seeing how we can structure programs around those areas within Integral Campus. Yeah.
Great, excellent. And just as a follow-up question, Emanuel, you had mentioned coaching, and I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit about what that is. What does a coaching session involve?
So the integral coaching framework is also using Integral more as a back-end framework. So it's not so much teaching the client about Integral, but using it as an assessment tool to work with the client. And so, a typical kind of coaching engagement would include kind of a first meeting where we'll figure out, okay, what's the topic? Where's the client at in different areas of his life? Where does he have strengths and weak points, and what does he want to work on? And then there's kind of an assessment phase. And then after that, there's kind of that is like cycles of development where, we work with the client on taking small steps in his life to improve on the topic that he's working on. And one of the things that I really like within the program is that it's using a lot of metaphor and kind of, we're looking at kind of the current way of being, and then the future way of being of the new way of being of how the client wants to be. And so kind of creating a program that helps the client move from one state to a next state, to a future state has been really interesting and good.
Yeah, great. And also one more question about when you had mentioned organizational consulting and development. Can you speak a little bit about what that is?
Well, I mean, organizational development is kind of like a broad academic field. In my sense, I'm leaning more towards kind of a reinventing organizations approach of, taking an assessment of an organization and seeing, okay, what are the different colors that are present, or like the different stages that are present within the organization? Where do they have strengths and where do they have weaknesses? And how can we, strengthen the weaknesses so the organization can move on to a next stage of development? And I think having that, trajectory that Lalou offers in Reinventing Organization is a really good starting point to assess organizations, to see, okay, this is where you're at. These are some of your strengths. These are some of your weaknesses, and looking at how can we improve those weaknesses to kind of move the overall organization forward. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that's really exciting. Super cool. Devon, you want to weigh on this?
What's next for me, Ryan, is I write every morning. It's been a practice that has been very, very dear to me for probably close to a decade now, and it's very ritualized, and continuing to write and to also publicly communicate what I'm writing is in addition to teaching. That's really what's next for me with my own sort of integral orientation as well as with Integral Campus. And I'm really excited for the unfoldings with Integral Campus, and that's all happening pretty soon. So in about 2 months' time, we'll start off with our Integral Campus Reflective Practitioner Program, and so that's something that I'm really excited about. In addition to these talking with Teal sessions with you, Ryan.
Great. And that would be the last thing we're going to touch on in this meeting is going to be a little bit about the program beginning on March 11th that you just mentioned, Devon. So do one of you guys want to speak a little bit about what that program involves and a little bit about what it's like, the Reflective Practitioner Program?
Sure, I'll start with that, Ryan, and invite both of you to elaborate. The Integral Campus Reflective Practitioner Program, is an 8-week online program, and in essence, it's an introduction to integral approaches. And so we look at the major dimensions, and so these are our stages, which we've talked about, the quadrants that we've talked about. Emanuel mentioned integral coaching, which relies heavily on the different lines of development. And so that's something that we'll also speak about in the Reflective Practitioner Program, in addition to types, in addition to states. And we'll also delve into an area that I have particular interest in is positive psychology, and about how both positive psychology and integral came out of transpersonal psychology. That was rooted in humanistic psychology. And so we'll delve into that in 1 week. And then as the program continues, there will be light what we're calling Odyssey tools, which is light work, in essence, homework. But it isn't meant to be burdensome. It isn't meant to be heavy. And so in the end, that'll culminate in a small final project. One other important feature is that throughout the 8-week program, there is a specific context in which you'll be addressing your learning. And so that could be, Emanuel mentioned education, leadership, sustainability. It could be business. It could be parenting. It could be family or community development. Or maybe it's a personal practice in your life. So as we're learning and as we're leading and learning together throughout this 8-week program, you have a specific context to apply the quadrant to, the different developmental stages and the other dimensions and so forth. And this first program, we are open to up to 20 participants in the program, and we're excited and inviting all to participate.
Wonderful, Devon. Thank you so much. It sounds really exciting. And Emanuel, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think Devon kind of mentioned all the big cornerstones. I think one of the things that we're trying to accomplish is to create a community where you can apply what we're talking about straight to your life, and then have a place where you can share with the group what's going on and how that works for you, and then get immediate feedback on that too. So there's more of an aspect on this, like creating a place for sharing instead of just like a one-way communication of one person talking and 20 people listening, and to create like a more of an interactive atmosphere. that's all I think I wanted to add. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that because that's something that's particularly of interest to me, and offering that platform in which people can really share their own insights, their own wisdom, and their own projects. And I feel like everyone, especially a lot of people who are interested in Integral, are people who are very, if nothing else, very interesting people, but oftentimes very wise. They're doing a very interesting project in the world that is applying integral theory that no one knows about or no one hears about because they don't really have any kind of platform or opportunity to share their work. And so I think having this environment where we're very much kind of crowdsourcing the wisdom and insights, as well as providing some specifics on how this could be, how the integral model could be applied, and also to bolster any subject or context in their life. So I'm really excited about getting to know people and the work that they're doing in more depth, and for just creating an environment and platform for everyone to just share, to contribute something to the integral movement as a whole. And I thought we could just end by just having a concluding statement about anything you feel inspired to say to end this call. So, Emanuel, you want to start?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of mention also briefly that, you know, we've talked about this in the beginning a little bit, but I think, you know, that there's like 3 very specific focus areas that we want to work on with Integral Campus, which is, you know, the first one being the podcast, Talking with Teal, that you, Ryan, are kind of spearheading. And then the second one, which is kind of the educational offerings that we're doing together and Devon is kind of spearheading. And then the third area would be to kind of establish a community of practice with regular kind of check-in and coaching calls where people can share their experiences about how things are going. But these are kind of the 3 main focus areas that we want to develop with Integral Campus in the future.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and thanks for the reminder. Actually, I'll just mention a little bit about what the Talking with Teal podcast is about too, because it relates to what we were just talking about, in that it's a way for, I just interview people on Zoom, and we record the interview and share it via YouTube, and people basically get to talk about whatever they want. It can be all about your own life and spiritual journey as it relates to integral theory. It can talk about your professional life and how you're applying it in the world. If you want to talk about really controversial issues and politically incorrect issues in an integral framework, we can do that too. And it's all about people just having a platform to share in a very in-depth level your own life, and so everyone can get to know each other on a more intimate level, and really cohere that community on a whole deeper level, kind of like an integral version of like Joe Rogan's podcast. But of course, someone like Joe Rogan only has very famous, highfalutin people on his show, and I want to really be the Joe Rogan of the grassroots, ordinary folk, so we can all get an inside glimpse into the interesting lives, and also being able to learn some of the wisdom insights from people on the ground. So that's what the podcast is going to be all about. And so if anyone's interested, you know, shoot me an email and let's get it scheduled. Let's do it. So Devon, do you have any concluding statements?
I'm appreciative for the visit here today with you, Ryan and Emanuel. And I think my concluding comments are going to focus on leadership. And so often it seems that we think of leadership in terms of position, of interpersonal leadership. And I'm really inspired by the comments of Miriam Martineau from Next Step Integral, who inquires in her integral parenting course into the question of what underlies your ship, the ship of your relationship, the ship of your friendship, the ship of your leadership. And to me, and I'd also suggest that when we speak in integral campus terms of leadership, this isn't singularly in the terms of positional leadership. It is in many ways about individual leadership. Personally, I define leadership as firstly about managing energies, firstly within ourselves and then within others, and about becoming a more integrated person so that we can bring those disparate elements of ourselves, those shadow pieces, the different dimensions of our intelligences, our different layers, dimensions, levels, stages of the self into a congruence so that we might more fully offer our gifts in the world. And I think it's this uniquely connective place that is inherent within all of us that at least I'm very committed to supporting and facilitating within Integral Campus here.
Wonderful. Yeah, brilliantly said. And also, just so that people know how to keep up with what we're doing, or if they're interested in joining the class, what is the next step for them? How do they do that?
Yeah, I think an appropriate avenue, Ryan, would be to email. We can email at integralcampus@outlook.com.
Ah.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, both of you, and I'm really happy that people got a chance to know a little bit more about us and your background and what you have done. And I'll just give a pitch and say I've known you both for a little over a year, I think, maybe a year. And it's been a real pleasure to get to know both of you, and I'm incredibly grateful for this opportunity to work with you and to offer a program like this together. And both of you have so much experience with the real world engagement and applying integral framework practically. And I think that's something that the integral movement really needs, and you two provide it, and also are excellent teachers. And as I was telling you, Devon, I saw your facilitation of the class the other day, and I was very impressed, and I can really vouch for both of your teaching ability and skill in delivering the material. So I'm really looking forward to this project and our next endeavor. And yeah, rock on, Integral Campus. So thank you both, and I thank you everyone for tuning in and listening today.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.